The diplomatic cruiser descended like a silver whisper onto the blasted surface of Zelvin Prime. Engines humming with deliberate elegance, from orbit. The planet looked like a rotting marble, green seas poisoned to black, once thriving cities reduced to charcoal. But from the open landing ramp, Ambassador Celia of the Solari still stepped forward in hope, tall, cloaked in flowing robes of shimmering pearl. Her long fingers clasped a ceremonial scroll. Her voice hummed with peaceful tones, already preparing the first words of reconciliation. Then, the other ship arrived. It didn't descend. It slammed into the rock like a falling war god. The Terran dropship's retrothrusters screamed, kicking up a mushroom cloud of ash and bone dust. Steel plating peeled back from its side, scarred by gunfire and plasma burns. And out of that chaos, he stepped Lieutenant Riker Vance. One boot thudded onto the ground, then the other. No escort, no formality. Just a towering human in matte black combat armor, plated like a tank. With a rifle slung across his back and a jagged blade sheathed at his hip. His face, what little was visible under the visor, was older than his file, said. Hard-cut and sun-scarred. Selya blinked, her translator orb hovering beside her shoulder. This is my protection, she asked. The Solari aide at her side shuffled nervously. Terran Union says he's the best they've got. That's not a compliment, she whispered. Riker stopped in front of her and lifted his visor just enough to reveal cold gray eyes and a faint scar tracing his jawline. Ambassador, he greeted, voice gravel rough. Let's get this over with before someone starts shooting. Lieutenant, she said carefully, we are here to prevent that exact outcome. He gave a low grunt. That's what I said. The receiving committee waited in the cracked hall of what used to be Zelvin's grand temple. Banners of both warring factions hung side by side, a forced temporary peace. Celia glided forward, offering palms open, eyes glowing softly in the Solari tradition of nonviolence. My people once saw a war, she began, her voice amplified across the ruins. We, too, believed destruction was strength. But strength is not destruction, it is restraint. Behind her, Riker stood silent, watching, scanning, counting every face, tracking hand movements, weighing threat potential like a wolf at a sheep conference. Danny saw it. One of the guards, dressed in ceremonial armor, was sweating badly, fingers twitching near his chest, too twitchy, too still, wrong heartbeat. Riker's hand moved to his sidearm. The guard lunged. A scream rang out, but before the man reached the center dais, Riker was already in motion. He didn't draw his weapon. He charged. The ground shook as he collided with the assassin mid-sprint, slamming him into a stone pillar. The impact cracked bone. Before the stunned delegates could react, Riker grabbed the man's plasma pistol, ripped it from his hand, and snapped it in half over his knee. Silence followed, heavy and choking. Riker stared down the chamber. Anyone else? No one moved. Not a breath dared. Celia stepped forward, her voice trembling. Lieutenant? He could have been disarmed peacefully. Riker turned, his eyes harder than steel. He brought a bomb, Ambassador. He dropped the broken pistol at her feet. The power core inside it blinked violently. A second longer, and the whole room would have gone sky-high. I brought the end. The corridor stank of ozone and fear. Ancient marble walls flanked Ambassador Celia as she walked again, composed down what used to be the sanctum of Accord. She could feel echoes of peace etched into the stone, remnants of a culture that believed in reason now. Those walls hid shadows. This is supposed to be neutral ground, she whispered, voice barely audible over the hum of flickering lights. The ceasefire applies here. Riker, 3 steps behind, scanned each doorway, like it was a sniper nest. They've broken ceasefires 6 times this week, he muttered. Neutral ground means nothing when both sides think they're right. Celia didn't respond. She adjusted the data slate in her palm, ready to present new terms that might bring the rebels into talks. Riker's boots thudded heavier with each step, a silent countdown of his patience. They reached a door, old brass, sealed by a control panel glowing with warm blue light. The biometric scanner blinked twice. Celia lifted her hand to unlock it. Riker grabbed her wrist. Wait, he pointed to the floor. A tripwire, fine as hair, stretched across the threshold. Celia's breath caught. This is sacred ground, she whispered harshly. They wouldn't, Riker cut her off. They did. He unholstered his sidearm, not to disarm the trap, just in case he needed it in the next 10 seconds. Celia moved to override the door with her credentials. Riker stepped forward instead, raised his boot hand, kicked. The door flew inward off its hinges with a deafening crash, slamming into the wall behind it. Gunfire erupted instantly. Riker moved like a thunderclap, one moment still, the next in motion, drawing his weapon mid-spin. He fired once, twice, 3 times, each shot clean, precise. When the smoke cleared, 3 bodies slumped over a treaty table. Bleeding across a peace banner, Celia stumbled in after him, horrified. This was supposed to be a meeting. They were holding a gun to the negotiator's head. Sure enough, the Zelvoni delegate lay gagged and bound at the table. Eyes wide in terrified gratitude, Celia dropped to her knees beside him, slicing the cords from his wrists. This was meant to be a dialogue. Riker knelt over one of the shooters, removed a locket from the corpse's neck. Inside was a photo to children, smiling, identical to the ones printed on a bounty poster he'd passed 3 blocks ago. They were rebels, he said, hiding under fake IDs. Their plan was a bloodbath. You don't know that, Celia said. They might have panicked. He looked at her dead calm. Panicked people don't set tripwires and bring silencers. They exited the chamber into bright sun. Sirens wailed somewhere distant. The world outside the temple had already heard about the incident. Celia walked ahead, spine rigid, her robe dragged through crimson dust. You can't keep solving problems with violence, she said over her shoulder. Riker followed, unfazed. I'm not solving problems. I'm making sure you live long enough to solve them. Celia stopped, faced him fully. Is there even a line for you, Lieutenant? Or do you just shoot and call it justice? I don't cross lines, Ambassador. I draw them. The war drums were silent, but only because everyone was waiting to see who would draw first blood, from orbit. The Terran Union command ship watched Zelvin Prime with quiet satellites and quieter intentions. Down on the ground, in a makeshift, temporary embassy dug into the ruins of the old city, Ambassador Celia stood before a dozen alien delegates. Her face serene, yet her hands trembled behind her back. Outside the meeting chamber, Riker stood posted like a gargoyle, cast in black alloy. She had asked him not to come inside this time. He hadn't argued, but he'd planted 2 drones in the ceiling panels anyway. Inside the chamber, thick tension clung to the air like smoke. The walls were painted with hopeful murals, children planting trees, suns rising on peaceful worlds. But today, the room was full of armed guards, pretending not to look trigger-happy. Celia cleared her throat, raised her voice. We can build something new, she said. You don't have to agree on the past to agree on tomorrow. Let's start with clean water, shared supplies, a humanitarian zone. The Zelvon warlord across from her leaned back, expression unreadable, one eye replaced by a surgical red lens. His voice was cold oil. You think we want water? We want justice. You wouldn't understand. You've never buried your people under orbital ash. Celia met his gaze. I understand grief. That's why I'm here. There was a murmur. Someone leaned closer to the warlord's ear. Then the words came like thunder. The humans will leave, or there will be no talks. Outside, Riker's earpiece buzzed as the live feed played. He didn't flinch. He simply sighed, loudly. "Here we go again." Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A click. Metal. Movement. He spun around and saw the guard down the hall flick his wrist. A thin blade extended silently from the sleeve. Riker didn't hesitate. He fired a single shock round into the floor sparks. Flying end. The whole corridor dropped into chaos. The assassin lunged. Riker caught him mid-leap, slammed him into the wall, disarmed the blade, and dropped him with a knee to the gut. Alarms began to shriek. In the meeting room, guards surged. Forward, blasters raised. The delegates jumped to their feet, shouting. Celia turned toward the door just as it exploded inward. Riker stood in the smoke, rifle raised, but not firing. He scanned the room. "Everyone sit down." No one moved. Celia's voice cracked like a whip. "Lieutenant?" Riker pointed to the window behind her. "Sniper. Second building, third window. Had his sights on your head, Ambassador." She stiffened. He looked at the warlord. "Your man." The warlord didn't answer. He didn't have to. Riker took a step forward. "One more stunt like that, and I stop being polite." The warlord sneered. "You're already an animal. What more can you do?" Riker smiled, and that smile was more terrifying than a firing squad. "You think this is me unleashed? Buddy, I'm still on a leash. You really don't want to see what happens when I drop it." Later, alone in the observation deck above the compound, Celia confronted him. "You stormed into a diplomatic chamber. You were about to get shot. You scared them all." "Good." She stared at him. "We're not going to win peace through terror, Riker." He stared out the shattered window, his voice quiet. "Sometimes, Ambassador, peace only works when someone's willing to be the monster at the gate." The first explosion didn't come from the battlefield. It came from the kitchen. A concussive blast tore through the east wing of the compound at 3:41 local time, flinging shattered ceramic, boiling steam, and 2 unconscious kitchen staff across the corridor. Fire suppression kicked in, but it was already too late. The peace compound was no longer neutral ground. Riker was the first one in, not a soldier on guard, not the night shift crew. Riker, he'd been awake in the lower barracks, armor half on, gun within reach. His instincts didn't let him sleep on war-torn worlds not since Galdeon. Now he sprinted through smoke-choked corridors, boots hammering stone, sidearm drawn. Behind him, sirens screamed, and red lights pulsed through the hall like a heartbeat. In cardiac arrest. He reached the blast site, saw what was left of the kitchen metal twisted like taffy, cabinets shredded by shrapnel. But the real problem wasn't the fire. It was the hole, a breach, carved clean into the wall behind the supply, racked up big enough for 2 soldiers to crawl through, maybe 3. It wasn't an accident. It was an infiltration. Riker keyed his comm. Security breach. Repeat internal breach. Full lockdown now. Meanwhile, Ambassador Celia stood alone in the eastern courtyard, addressing a small group of injured civilians. She had insisted on seeing them herself. Bandages wrapped across her slender arms from the earlier blast shockwave. "This isn't just about the leaders," she said softly, kneeling beside a Zelvoni child with burn marks on her leg. "It's about you, all of you. You deserve better." Behind her, one of the guards turned his head. Too slow, too stiff. Celia noticed it a second too late. The man raised a concealed pistol, but he never got to pull the trigger. A thwip, a blur of motion, and suddenly the guard's weapon was kicked free from his grip, skidding across the courtyard stones. Riker had appeared from nowhere. One punch. The guard collapsed like wet laundry. Riker stood over the body, breathing hard. "You're a walking target," he growled. "Stop making speeches in open air." Celia looked up at him, pale. "How did he get inside?" "Same way as the others. There's a hole in our wall." Hours later, back in the war room, Celia reviewed the security feeds. The footage confirmed it. 3 infiltrators in total. 2 had planted bombs and fled. The third had orders to eliminate Celia personally. She stared at the screen, shaking her head. They knew our schedule, our movements, our personnel. This wasn't just an attack. This was a message. Riker leaned over the table, tapping one of the paused frames, recognized the insignia. She squinted. A jagged triangle, painted in red across the attacker's wrist. That's a rogue faction, not officially part of the Zelvoni leadership, right? Which means someone inside the talks is feeding them intel. She looked up sharply. You think there's a spy in the delegation? Riker nodded grimly. I think there's more than one. That night, as the compound lights dimmed, Riker sat alone on the rooftop. Sniper rifle across his lap. He watched the skyline of Zelvin Prime, full of broken towers, flickering lights, and silent drones circling like vultures. He hated this place, not because of the ruins, or the war, or the cold alien wind. He hated it because it reminded him of Earth just before it burned, and he wasn't going to let Celia fail like Earth had. They came for her while she was speaking. Again, Ambassador Celia was halfway through a speech to the Unity Council, a last-ditch attempt to secure a truce corridor when the walls of the chamber detonated inward. Dust, shrapnel, screaming. 3 masked intruders burst through the smoke with military precisions. Fast, lethal. The first 2 gunned down the guards. The third leveled a blaster at Celia's chest, and then nothing. No gunfire. No blood, just a wet, bone-breaking crack, and the sudden, sickening sound of a body hitting the floor. Riker moved like a storm on rails. He didn't shout. He didn't speak. He just broke them. One attacker went down with a shattered knee. Another never saw the elbow coming, crushed, his windpipe mid-spin. The third. Riker yanked him back by the collar, slammed him into a pillar, and drove his combat knife through the helmet's visor. By the time the smoke cleared, everyone in the chamber was staring at a human-shaped weapon standing over a pile of corpses, blood on his gloves, chest heaving, and not a word. Later, in the emergency medbay, Celia sat on the edge of the table, lips trembling but jaw set. She stared at Riker, who was being patched up with field gel where a shard of glass had torn through his side. He hadn't even flinched. You killed them, she whispered. They were trying to kill you. You didn't even warn them. Not a word. He looked at her tired eyes, dark voice flat. Warning was last week. This was response. 3 hours later, Riker broke into the underground tech archives. The base AI, an old Terran relic named Watchdog, didn't try to stop him, just flickered to life on a cracked console. You're not authorized. I'm not asking for permission. Riker inserted a data spike into the core and began pulling files names, supply logs, and coded transmission bursts. Watchdog hissed, static screaming across the feed. This is a diplomatic system. Not anymore. Within minutes, he'd found what he needed. A list of transmissions bouncing to off-grid satellites, all originating from the ambassadorial wing. Celia had a spy on her staff by dawn. He had him. Ensign Delroa, pale-skinned. DoID, aide, who'd been with Celia since the first trade summit. Friendly, soft-spoken, always carried her data slate, and remembered her tea. Now, he was zip-tied to a chair in the decontamination chamber, a black bag over his head. Celia entered in disbelief. Riker, what the hell is this? He's the leak, Riker said flatly. Confirmed pings from his cum badge to the rebel frequencies. Cross-referenced with every assassination window. Celia stared at the trembling young man. Delro, he's a student diplomat, which made him perfect. Who would suspect the intern? Did you torture him? Not yet, Riker said coldly. But the rebels won't stop until someone makes them bleed for trying. She stepped between them. You don't get to decide that. This is still a peace mission. He met her eyes. Not anymore. That night, Riker left the compound without orders, wearing black armor, carrying no insignia. He descended into the slums of Zelvin Prime, past the checkpoints, past the mines, into the place where the assassins were bred. And when he found their bunker, he made sure only one message escaped. A charred helmet, delivered to the rebel command by drone. You come for her again, and I come for all of you. Art. The smell of scorched bone clung to the wind, and Celia knew before anyone told her that Riker had gone too far. The drone arrived at the compound's gate at dawn, its payload unmistakable. A melted helmet, rebel insignia half-burned, and that handwritten message, signed only with a single, brutal letter, R.SELYA, stood over the drone's still spinning blades, her hand trembling. Around her, Terran officers and alien envoys whispered in circles. The message was clear. Riker had declared a personal war, and worse, it was working. Within hours, the rogue cells across Zelvin Prime began pulling back. Intel feeds showed comms gone dark, supply caches abandoned, entire squads retreating underground. Fear not, diplomacy had succeeded where words had failed, and Celia hated it. She found Riker back in the decontamination bay, sitting on a crate, methodically cleaning a blood-stained rifle. He didn't look up when she entered. You disobeyed direct orders, she said coldly. Did what needed doing. You lit a fire in a powder room, Riker. He stood, calm and controlled. I put the wolves on notice. She stepped forward, voice rising. You set diplomacy back months. They'll never trust us now. They weren't going to trust us anyway, he shot back. Not after 3 assassination attempts. They only respect strength. And what are we then? She demanded. Liberators? Or monsters with cleaner uniforms? Riker's expression didn't change, but something in his voice did. I don't care what we are. I care that you're still alive. Celia froze. Silence bloomed between them, like a minefield. He looked away. They weren't going to stop. So I made them pause. That's all this buys you time. You still want peace. Use it. Hours later, in the Unity Hall, Celia stood before a fractured council. The rebel threat had vanished for now, but so had any illusion of trust. Alien dignitaries accused her of running a covert Terran military op. One Zelvoni delegate slammed the table. You bring assassins and peace in the same breath, and expect us to listen. Celia didn't flinch. I expect you to survive. I expect you to rise above your fear, and mine, and his. She let her voice harden. Double quotes. Yes, my security officer retaliated, because 3 of you signed off on a kill order behind these walls. We have proof. I can name names, but I won't. Murmurs. Audible tension. I won't, because this is still salvageable, she continued. But not if we pretend this isn't. War. I'm not here to be your shield. I'm here to be your last chance. Back at the compound that night, Riker stood alone in the observation dome. His armor lay at his feet. He wasn't wearing his weapon for once. Just a shirt. The stars above Zelvon flickered through cracked glass. Selya approached slowly. You gave me time, she said. I used it. He didn't turn around. They listen. They're scared. Good. Not of the rebels, Riker. Of us. Of you. Finally, he looked at her. She stared into his eyes. I came to end this war with words. You came to end it with fire. He said nothing, and then softly, like a truth that hurt too, admit, she added, maybe, we both forgot. Fire spreads. She left him there, staring at the stars, and somewhere, deep below the surface of the planet, the remaining rebel leaders gathered in silence. One of them raised the burned helmet with Riker's note inside. Another opened a black case and pulled out a hollow point plasma round Terran issue. Enough warnings, he said. Time to answer fire, with fire. It started with silence, no alerts, no blaring alarms, no intercepted COMMs. Just silence. The kind that creeps under your skin and coils there like a warning at 0400. All outgoing surveillance feeds from Sector 9 went dead. Patrol drones vanished off the grid. A relief convoy vanished en route to the northern checkpoint. Not destroyed. Not hijacked. Erased. Riker was in the war room 15 minutes later, already suited up. Selya tried to stop him. We don't know what we're walking into. That's the point, he growled. They want us blind. She followed him into the corridor, her voice low and tense. Whatever this is, they're escalating. Riker paused us for a second and turned his head slowly. No, Ambassador, they're not escalating. They're baiting. Sector 9 was nothing but bones when they got there. Burned transport hulls littered the ground. The smell of scorched electronics and cooked meat hung heavy in the wind. Riker moved through the wreckage like a predator, silent, efficient. Celia couldn't look at the charred outline of the Terran, Manek still clutching a broken supply crate. We trained these people for peacekeeping, she said bitterly. We sent them out with no weapons, just goodwill and medkits. Riker knelt beside a melted drone. He didn't look up. That was your first mistake. Suddenly, a ping echoed through his helmet motion sensors. 30 meters. Closing fast. He shoved Celia behind an overturned vehicle just as the sniper shot cracked through the air. The plasma bolt missed her head by inches, carving a molten groove into the wall behind them. They weren't alone. Figures emerged from the wreckage. 6. No. 7 rebels, armor blacked out, rifles humming with overcharged plasma. One of them wore a stolen Terran badge. Riker stood slowly, lifting his rifle with slow, deliberate menace. Target acquired, he muttered into his comm. Permission to retaliate. Celia's voice cut through his earpiece. No, stand down. We don't kill unless we have to. Then, a familiar voice echoed from across the field. Human, a rebel leader called. Your diplomat dies tonight. You should have let her bleed last time. Rikers, I twitched. That voice. He remembered it from the transmission that played. Before the first assassination attempt. He leaned into the comm, voice like ice. Permission denied, understood. Then he switched off the comms. Celia screamed through her headset. Riker. Riker. No, too late. Riker sprinted forward, sliding into cover, unleashing 3 precision shots. One rebel went down hard, gurgling as his mask filled with blood. Another took a bolt to the leg, crippled before he could scream. The others scattered. But Riker didn't stop. He moved like a ghost through fire and metal, breaking their formation before they could regroup. No fear, no hesitation, just fury. 15 minutes later, it was over. 7 rebels, all dead. Riker stood over the last one, the leader, gutshot, bleeding out against the rubble. You knew I was coming, Riker said coldly. Why? The rebel coughed, blood staining his teeth. We're not afraid of you anymore. Riker crouched. You should be. He reached into his pack, pulled out a Terran comm tag, and shoved it into the man's hand. Tell your friends, I'm done playing bodyguard. Then he turned away, and let the man die. Back at the compound, Celia confronted him in the medbay. You went rogue, she snapped. He peeled off his gloves, hands shaking slightly. They killed medics. You disobeyed me. They declared war. She stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. You're becoming what they fear. He met her gaze. No anger, just emptiness. I was always what they feared. You were just the illusion. That night, Riker sat alone on the wall, watching lightning crackle in the distant clouds over Zelvin Prime. In his lap was a list of names, confirmed rebel leaders, financiers, sympathizers. One by one, he circled each one. The peace mission was over. Now, it was personal. The list was almost complete. Names, coordinates, affiliations all scrawled in Riker's tight handwriting, some already crossed out in black ink. The others, they were marked in red. Celia stared at the list, her voice trembling. How many of them have you already killed? Riker didn't answer. He stood at the edge of the barracks rooftop, watching the city lights below flicker through a rising haze of smoke. Explosions had rocked the outer districts the night before, not from rebel attacks, from retaliation. His retaliation. You've become the war you swore to stop, she whispered. He finally turned. And you've become the diplomat they stopped listening to. The rebel cells were falling, one by one. But not from precision strikes or coordinated operations. From fear. Their bunkers turned to slag. Their leaders found suffocated in bunkers. No gunfire, no explosions. Just surgical, silent, merciless. Riker had learned to speak their language, and it was written in death. At dawn, the council called for an emergency session. Celia stood before them, alone. No guards, no escort, no Riker. We're at a crossroads, she told them. You can blame Terra, you can abandon diplomacy, but let me be clear, you will not stop him now. A delegate sneered. So we're ruled by a rogue Terran soldier. Celia shook her head. No, you're threatened by one. There's a difference. She stepped forward. Give me control. One last chance to pull this back from the edge. Silence then. At last permission granted. But the message was clear. If she failed, the council would denounce both her and Riker. There would be no second chances. She found him in the ruins of an old Belitha, site of one of the rebel command posts. He'd just leveled. Charred corpses still steamed nearby. Riker stood in the center, covered in ash and blood, holding a datapad that pinged with the last confirmed target. You're out of names, Celia said. There's always more. She walked up to him, calm, controlled. I got the council to stand down, just for now, but only if you stop, if you come back. He looked at her with eyes that had long since burned out. I don't want to come back. You're not built for peace, she said softly. No, he agreed. But I am built for you. That silenced her. I followed you here because I believed in you, he said. But now, I don't know if I can stand by while you keep asking monsters to be reasonable. And I can't stand by while you become one, she said. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Smoke curled around them like ghosts. Then Riker held out a small black case. She opened it. Inside, his rifle's targeting chip, removed. Useless without it. I'm done, he said. For you, but only for you. Weeks passed. The rebel cells broke into fragments, leaderless, disorganized, too afraid to regroup. Celia's voice rose, again in the halls of the council. She brokered a ceasefire, but even as diplomats nodded and shook hands, every room fell silent when a human in black stepped through the door behind her, unarmed, but watched like a storm cloud with legs. Peace had returned, but only because vengeance had walked through first, in the quiet, after war. Celia and Riker stood at the edge of the city once more. You saved the mission, she said. No, Riker replied. You saved me. The mission just survived it. She looked at him. Do you think peace will hold? Riker didn't smile. He never really did. No. But if it doesn't, he turned, eyes cold and clear. They know who comes next.